Diagnostics webisode on our Nutraval test. My name is Andrea and I am part of Genova Diagnostics clinical education team, and I will be guiding you through this test today. So the Nutraval is Genova Diagnostics' largest nutritional profile. It includes a collection of a first morning urine sample as well as a full blood draw. It includes looking at organic acids, amino acids, oxidative stress markers, essential and metabolic fatty acids, so omega-3, omega-6s, nutrient and toxic elements, glutathione, CoQ10, homocysteine, and vitamin D. This is what the front page looks like. At Genova Diagnostics, we aim to make our test as user-friendly as possible. So a lot of our tests, including the Nutraval, work on this color coding system. And so the green means that it's a normal or maintenance dosaging. Borderline means that there's a slightly higher need. And the high need means that there is generally a degree of deficiency around it. It's based on an algorithm from the patient's results within this test. The algorithm is, there's a document called the Nutraval Interp at a Glance, which shows the biomarkers that feed into each nutrient. It's not included in the test, but you can request, email us, and we can send that document out to you. The second page of the test is the suggested supplement schedule. So it is what it says. It correlates with pages 1, so where the nutrients were green, amber, or yellow, or red on the front page, they show with green, yellow, or red boxes on this page. This page also includes the DRI, which is the daily recommendation. This is based on sort of government guidelines. It's around the minimum dosaging to prevent disease. The patient's daily recommendations, again, are based on the patient's results, and it gets into more therapeutic and optimizing dosages. And then there is space for you, the practitioner, to alter those dosaging depending on what dietary interventions you may also want to consider. And then it also gives recommendations at the bottom which don't have color coding system, but just show a figure, and that is the amino acids. So the figure indicates that there's potentially a deficiency around that amino acids, and that number, or that milligrams per day, indicates the dosaging needing to correct that deficiency. The next 2 pages are really nice pages to use with patients. They're expansions of pages 1 and 2, so they correlate where the nutrient was, where the nutrient need was green, amber, or red on the front first 2 pages. They correlate, the X correlates with that, and it correlates with the dosaging on page 2. But the nice thing about these pages is they get into the function, the cause of deficiency, the health implications, and the food sources of each of those nutrients. So again, if you didn't want to go in with full-on supplementation program, you can look at food sources and implementing dietary changes from these pages as well. So again, really nice pages to use with the patients. There's also a page called functional imbalances. So where, again, this is and gives an indication of a need around mitochondrial dysfunction. We do look at the Krebs cycle pathway on this within this test. Need for methylation, so we get into looking around those B vitamins and those nutrients needed to support methylation. And then we also get into some toxic exposure markers as well. So what is an organic acid? We get this question a lot. Organic acids are metabolites produced by metabolic pathways. So this is a very basic example of a metabolic pathway. So you have metabolite A that uses an enzyme to convert into metabolite B. And if that pathway is happening effectively, that pathway happens smoothly and they all convert into each other. However, you can get blockages within this pathway. And blockages can come from either a nutrient deficiency, or they can also come from toxic metal inhibition. So what we're looking at on this test, or what you measure with organic acids, is whether that metabolite A is converting to metabolite B. If there is a nutrient deficiency that that enzyme requires in order to convert metabolite A into metabolite B, then that metabolite A is unable to do that, and that metabolite A then gets dumped in the urine, and that's what we are measuring, and that's what we start to look at the nutrient needs, because we know that that enzyme converts that metabolite A into metabolite B, say for instance, requires B1. So we know if we start to see metabolite A in the urine, it means it's not flowing through that pathway as well, indicating that there's potentially a need around that nutrient. In this, as an example, B1. We also start to look at heavy metals on this test as well. And so heavy metal toxicity can also start to block the pathway. So again, it's about looking at it holistically through a whole picture, which the beauty of this test is that we both look at those areas. So the organic acid portion of this test is broken down into 5 key areas. So malabsorption and dysbiosis, cellular energy and mitochondrial metabolites, which is the Krebs cycle, neurotransmitter metabolites, vitamin markers, and toxic and detoxification markers. The first section we look at is malabsorption and dysbiosis. So this is starting to look at maybe gut health a little bit. The IAA and the PAA, or those malabsorption markers, can give an indication of whether there is maybe a degree of protein maldigestion going on, or maldigestion going on, which may lead on to nutrient deficiencies. And then there is some markers around bacterial and yeast dysbiosis. This is, again, these are metabolites. We're not directly measuring bacteria and yeast from these. These are organic acids produced potentially by bacterial and yeast dysbiosis. I use it as an indicator if patients are experiencing, specific GI symptoms, then it is, and this pattern is showing, you see a lot of these bacterial dysbiosis and yeast markers coming up high. The suggestion would be to go on and do further GI testing to get more specific information around the specific bacteria, yeasts, or parasites that the patient may have. That section feeds into the need for probiotics and pancreatic enzymes, which you find on page 2 in the suggested supplement schedule, and on those pages 3, 4, 5, and 6, those expansion pages that you use with the patients. The next section that we look at is the Krebs cycle. We all love the Krebs cycle. And this diagram hopefully helps to break it down into a bit of a clearer picture of how this pathway works. So this is a metabolic pathway. So the green bubbles denote the cofactors to help support those enzymes. And then the red bubbles denote the heavy metals. Remember when we talked about that metabolic pathway, that heavy metals can also block the pathway. So we also show you the heavy metals that can inhibit the pathway. So as an example, as part of that citric acid cycle, isocitric acid requires B3, magnesium, and manganese to convert into alpha ketogluteric acid. So we can see here that isocitric acid is high, meaning that it's not feeding into alpha ketogluteric acid as well as it could be. We know from that green bubble that it requires magnesium, manganese, and B3 as cofactors, but also aluminium can block that pathway as well. So it's about information gathering from your patient to see whether they are using, you know, aluminium within their cooking, deodorants, things like that, and maybe that's blocking this pathway, or whether maybe it is around those cofactors. Again, thinking about malabsorption, thinking about their diet, you know, are they getting, you know, a kind of a beige diet, or are they having a nutrient-rich diet, which would include these nutrients? The next section we look at is neurotransmitter metabolites. So again, we're not measuring neurotransmitters specifically. We're not measuring dopamine and serotonin specifically. We are looking at urinary metabolites, so these pathways, which again feed into the nutrient need. So we look at breakdown markers from noradrenaline and adrenaline, dopamine, as well as serotonin. And so again, we start to think about the cofactors. So B vitamins feed into a lot of this, as does magnesium. You also maybe think about stress with noradrenaline and adrenaline going down these pathways as well. So it can give an insight into, again, more of those nutrient needs. It does, and it can correlate with mood disorders. So again, it might be interesting to see these pathways with patients who are struggling with mood disorders, and maybe thinking about nutrient needs for them to support their conditions. As I say, it's another interesting section to get into, and it becomes interesting when you get you know, case history alongside it. The next section within the organic acids part of this test is looking at vitamin markers. It should probably say B vitamin markers, because that's basically what these all require. So the first four, or first three, no, sorry, it is the first four, all those alpha ketos. So in order to metabolize those alpha ketos, they require B1, B2, B3. So we know that if we see high levels of these alpha ketos, it means, again, they're not moving along in the pathway. They're getting blocked and they're being dumped in the urine. So again, that feeds in that need for B1, B2, B3. Formiglutamic acid, or FIGLU as it's referred, is a functional marker for B9. This can be interesting to look at if somebody has an MTHFR SNP, to see if functionally that MTHFR SNP is expressing. Glutaric and isovaleric glycine are around B2. Methylmalonic acid, again, thinking about COMT, that COMT SNP, and whether it's expressing a need for B12. Xantharidic is a functional need for B6. And then we also get into around biotin with a 3-hydroxypropionate and 3-hydroxy isovaleric acid. So again, I look for trends here to see whether there's a strong need overall for B vitamins. The final section of the organic acid part is looking at toxic and detoxification markers. This is urinary, so it is around exposure rather than body burden. Stearine is from commercial products. That's what that alpha ketophenylacetic acid is measuring or looking at. So soft-sided plastics, takeaway packaging, water bottles, you know, things like that, anything sort of stearine-based, just querying the patient around exposure of those. MTBE is a petrol additive, so people who live in busy cities, near busy roads, who travel a lot, if they don't live in those types of areas, it can be, and it's thought that it's starting to contaminate water supply, and that's how it's getting into our systems. These are phase 1 detoxified, so it's again more around that exposure, but it's again maybe overall looking at that toxic burden on the liver. The final kind of marker within this, another interesting marker, is pyroglutamic acid, which shows kind of a need around the building blocks, or the need for glutathione. Within the NutrEval, we do measure glutathione, but this can start to give an indication of kind of that need for it as well. So we now move on to the amino acids. So in the NutrEval, the amino acids are from urine. So with urinary amino acids, you're looking at kind of dietary intake. and we tend to look for patterns. So we're looking to see whether they are coming out low. And if they are coming out low, we do see that correlating with patients who are vegans and vegetarians. So it's interesting to see with those patients, you know, whether they are getting sufficient kind of protein intake from their vegan and vegetarian-based diets, or where the gaps are, where you might need to support them. Also, when we see low amino acids, it may also be around digestion. So you could maybe go back and look at those digestive markers to see whether they are coming out high, and whether maybe there is a bit of maldigestion going on there, which may need further sort of digestive enzymes or hydrochloric acid support. These, as I say, feed into that page 2, so that need, showing the daily kind of recommendations for amino acids on that page 2, like we discussed. These are the nutritionally essential ones, so the ones we can only get from our diet. We then also look at non-essential amino acids, which are the ones we can make. Again, these tend to correlate with the essential ones. If they all coming out low, they tend to come out low overall in the essential and the non-essential. But you know, sometimes, or if they're coming out high, it may indicate that the patient's either on maybe a higher protein diet, or they're maybe supplementing with protein powders. The intermediate metabolites within the amino acid page, again, we're sort of looking at that need for vitamins as cofactors to help utilize amino acids. There is one on there specifically called 3-methylhistidine, which is an interesting marker to look out for, because it indicates a catabolism of muscle tissue. So it's one to look out for. You don't want to tend, or you know, if you do see this high, it's about thinking why that patient is maybe breaking down muscle. We see it with patients with eating disorders. We also see it with patients who are sort of bodybuilders, or really doing heavy workouts within the gym. But stress can also be implicated. You know, stress is cortisol is a catabolic, or has catabolic effects. And so if somebody is really stressed, we may also see some muscle breakdown with that as well. And then there are the dietary peptide related markers. Oops, sorry. So these are 2 peptides or 2 amino acids put together. So they're larger protein molecules. You tend not to want to see larger protein molecules in your urine sample. If you are, it can indicate again and correlate back with protein maldigestion. So looking back at, again, those digestion markers in the beginning on the organic acids, but also looking at their overall amino acid pages, amino acids that we were just talking about, whether they were coming out low. If you see these starting to come out high and your amino acids coming out low, then that's an indication that there is kind of maldigestion going on there. You're not breaking, the patient's not breaking down their amino acids enough, and they're just being dumped in the urine as larger protein molecules. It can also maybe suggest an indication of gut permeability as well. So this may also be another indicator, or drive another decision to go on and do further stool testing to get more specific information around, you know, their digestive enzymes, their protein digestion, and kind of whether there's anything that might be driving gut permeability as well. So that's the urine part of the NutrEval. So that's the organic acids and the amino acids. We then come on to the blood portion of this test. So the biomarkers that are measured from the blood sample that the patient submits. So the first section is looking at essential fatty acids. So basically we're looking at the breakdown or the proportion of fats within a cell membrane. Because we're looking at that cell membrane and it's measured from red blood cells, it's representative of the last kind of 90 to 120 days. So you're looking at kind of the balance of the fats within that cell membrane within that kind of time frame. So this is what that page looked like. So we break it down into those fats, those fatty acid categories. So omega-3, omega-6, omega-9, saturated fats. And as I say, we're looking at kind of the balance and proportion of them. In this sense, you can see that their omega-3s are actually quite low. Their omega-6s aren't too bad. You know, they're certainly in a greater proportion than the omega-3s. And their saturated fats are, you know, overall looking okay, but maybe trending a little bit low. So you might start to query about a patient's fat intake. Are they getting enough fat? Or again, maybe coming down to absorption. Are they absorbing their fats? There's also a section at the bottom called the cardiovascular risk assessment, which starts to look at the balance of omega-6 and omega-3s, which in this sense, you can see that their omega-6 are greater than their omega-3s. I'm looking at AAA, so arachidonic acid, which can be pro-inflammatory in comparison to their EPA, which is anti-inflammatory. So looking at that balance. And then there's also the omega-3 index. So we know from this that their omega-3 fat percentage within a cell membrane is low, but the omega-3 index can give an indication of their overall omega-3 index, which shows again that this patient is really low in omega-3s, and you would consider intervention. As well as looking at sort of the overall percentage and the balance of those omegas and the fats of the cell membrane, we also look at the metabolism of the omega-3 and the omega-6s. So with the omega-3 and the omega-6s, you have that those parent alpha-linoleic and linoleic acids. So it's not uncommon to see these at nice, robust levels. You know, so their patient is getting them into their diet. But what can happen again with these enzymes, as you can see in the middle, the delta-6 desaturase, the elongase, is that those enzymes don't have the sufficient nutrients to help support that pathway. So as an example, down the omega-6 family, we can see that this patient has nice levels of linoleic. It's converting down to gamma-linoleic acid, I will say. Sorry, I got my tongue twisted there. Gamma-linoleic acid, but it's not converting down to DGLA, dihomo-gamma-linoleic acid, very well. And you can see that that pathway, or that enzyme, is called elongase. And that elongase requires things like B vitamins, B3, B6, B5, biotin, and vitamin C. So again, even if somebody's getting sufficient intake of their fats, or their fats overall look relatively okay, they may need to look at the pathways as well, and those cofactors needed to support those enzymes. We then come on to the oxidative stress markers. So as mentioned, we do measure glutathione as a direct measurement. Lipid peroxide, which is from urine, sorry, this is from urine, not from blood. Lipid peroxide is a marker for oxidative stress to lipids. So again, it's an interesting marker to look at with the lipids to see, again, whether there might be oxidative stress going on there. 808DG is oxidative stress to DNA. And then we also measure coenzyme Q10. So, you know, a really good indication of a patient's overall oxidative stress picture, but as well as antioxidants. So the fire and the firefighters, and looking at that balance. Vitamin D is also included on this test. It's in American units, so I've provided a conversion to convert into UK units. That's something to keep in mind if a patient's gone to their GP and had vitamin D testing done, just to make sure that this does need to be converted. And then we get into the nutrient toxins. So again, this is looking at blood. Now, on some of these markers like magnesium and zinc, is part of the organic acids profile. They are included on that front page, so we're looking at them functionally within the organic acids. But here we're also looking at them in blood. generally deficiencies start to turn up at an organic acid at a cellular level prior to blood. Blood is homeostatic and will remain stable for as long as possible. So it is not uncommon, as an example, to see normal red blood cell magnesium levels in blood, but have a high need for it on the front page from the organic acids. It's, as I say, it's not uncommon, or it's nutrient deficiencies tend to turn up at a cellular level in the urine more so than in the blood. We also look at heavy metals. And remember, we talked about, again, with those organic acids and with those enzymes, heavy metals can block some of those pathways. We don't measure all of the heavy metals that affect particularly that Krebs cycle, but certainly mercury and arsenic are included in that. So if you start to see high levels of mercury and maybe blockages in that Krebs cycle pathway, you know, it may be this heavy metal that's impacting on that. So that's, again, something just to correlate back and to consider. And then finally, we measure homocysteine. So homocysteine is obviously a metabolite from methylation. We know that methylation requires things like B6, B9, B12. Zinc comes also into play, magnesium comes also into play. And so it's interesting to correlate this back to the functional need for those B vitamins, whether there's a stronger need around magnesium. So you can, again, sort of gain a little bit of a picture, or a bigger, broader picture of the patient's maybe methylation needs by looking at this marker, as well as their overall B vitamin needs from the organic acids. So that's the standard NutrEval test that we've been talking about. There are add-ons, so you can add on genetic SNPs. So MTHFR is obviously the genetic SNP for breaking down folate into its methylated form. So again, you could look at it genetically, whether they have a polymorphism with MTHFR, and then also, remember, we measure forminoglutamic acid, FIGLU, which is the functional need for B9. So you can see, again, genetically, genotypic and phenotypically, what's the picture, or correlating the picture. We also measure ApoE. We don't really measure anything around cholesterol on this test, but again, it starts to indicate their predisposition towards that. TNF-alpha, you know, whether there is, you know, a predisposition towards inflammation, and then COMT, which obviously comes into methylation as well. So again, start to getting an indication of their genes and their genotype and their kind of predispositions. So there are some practicalities with the NutrEval test. So it is a first morning urine sample, and that sample does need to be frozen. The blood sample, it's so this is a fasting test, so it does need to be a fasting blood sample. So that's something to consideration, you know, with patients collecting, if they do book to go for to get book a phlebotomist, that it needs to be probably in the morning. And it does need to be centrifuged. On our website, we do have a list of phlebotomy services that will take draw blood samples for our tests. So that's under the clinicians on our front page on our website. We are continuously working to expand the phlebotomy services throughout the country. Appreciate there are parts of the country where it is more difficult to get blood samples, but as I say, we are working on that. And then sort of just other practicalities is that if you want baseline results, they need to be sort of 4 days clear of any kind of vitamins, supplements that they are taking. It is suggestive to eat their normal diet 24 hours prior. This is mainly for the amino acids, because we talked about the amino acids being urinary, and urinary being reflective of diet. So it's ensuring that they are eating their normal diet 2 days prior, or 24 to 48 hours prior to the test, to ensure that the amino acids are reflective of kind of what their day in, day out dietary intake of protein is. because of the urine collection portion of this test, it is suggested to avoid excessive intake of fluid intake 24 hours prior to the test. You can get samples that are too dilute, which can skew the results. Samples must be couriered back to the lab. If you want to add the genomic part on, the buccal swab is always included in the kit. You just need to tick on the form to say that you want to add those on. And then the turnaround time is roughly around 21 days, and that is working days, so it's roughly about 3 weeks. There is also really great support material on our website around the Nutraval and all of our tests. Again, on our front page, if you go test search or test menu, it brings up all of our tests alphabetically. If you put in Nutraval, there is it gives all the information on there. So turnaround time, collection instructions, a sample report, but it also gives an interpretive guide and any kind of additional information. So again, really supportive information on our website and for all of our tests. As part of the practitioner support team, we are obviously available. We are available for support calls. So if you get a result, we would highly encourage you to call our customer support team or our clinical education team and book in a support call to discuss your results with us. Thank you very much for listening.